Good evening, everyone. You may have noticed that there was no intro to this video, and there will not be an outro. And that's because I want to distance myself from Lutheranism and scholasticism as such, because I can no longer call myself a Lutheran or a scholastic. In this video, I'm going to go over why that is, where I'm going, and the arguments that were presented to me that make me no longer either a scholastic or a Lutheran. I don't want to leave the channel without you guys knowing why, because I think that'd be unfair. Anyway, might as well get into it. I was at Target looking to buy some Funko Pops, and I was just in a rush. Man, I was really in a rush, and I didn't have my phone on me, unfortunately. Must have forgotten in the car or something. And so I look around, I'm trying to find somebody to just ask what time it is. First man I find, I'm like, oh, thank God. Tap on his shoulder. Turns around. I say, well, sir, do you know what time it is? And as I'm saying that, I realize, oh, it's Jeff Durbin. When I ask him what time it is, he just starts yelling at me, by what standard? By what standard? By what standard? And I'm just thrown into a frenzy. And what he points out to me is that to understand what time it is, like to know that it's 4 p.m. or say 5 p.m., any time on the clock, I have to presuppose a Reformed Baptist theology. And this really threw me off because obviously I'm not a Reformed Baptist. But he was eventually able to make me realize through our discussion that, for example, if we are to ask someone a basic question on, say, chemistry, unless they preface everything with, well, God made the element, God is involved here, they can't actually have a full understanding. And I'll get into how that affects me, what I think needs to happen in light of that. But Pastor Durbin really showed me a lot that I was unaware of, hadn't thought of before. And frankly, I can't go back to scholastic Lutheranism now. So I'll start off with scholasticism and the problems with it. Number one, he pointed out to me that scholasticism is not in the Bible. That Aristotle was not a Christian, actually. I didn't know that. And what he said, of course, he pointed out is that we can't cite pagan sources for things because they're not the Bible. Only the Bible should be our source of truth. Justin Peters had a wonderful tweet a few weeks ago, I think, where somebody said how Lord of the Rings and Tolkien and his works in general really influenced his worldview. And Justin Peters said, "No work of fiction should ever influence and shift your worldview. Only the Bible should." Was such a good point. I really appreciated that. And in the same way, Pastor Durbin pointed out to me that reading some like Aristotle, that shouldn't change what you think. The only facts that we should affirm with any degree of certainty beyond just mere hypotheticals is going to be stuff that we find in Scripture. And so if I'm wasting my time reading Thomas Aquinas and these scholastics, I am going back to paganism. Because what Aristotle says is really incorrect on just about everything, and we shouldn't use any philosophy from outside of scripture whatsoever. Um, we may use terms and phrases as presuppositionalists that come from Immanuel Kant and Hegel, among others, and really use the thought of non-Christian thinkers in the Enlightenment and so on, and post-Enlightenment, but that's different. When it comes to Aristotle, since he wasn't a Christian and he was used by Roman Catholics, that shows that he's wrong and we shouldn't use him. My general epistemology now is going to be if the Roman Catholics say it, it's false. If anything opposes Roman Catholicism, it's true. And the same goes for Thomas Aquinas. So if Thomas Aquinas says something, it's false. Well, Thomas Aquinas uses Aristotle. The Roman Catholic Church uses Aristotle. Therefore, we can't use Aristotle. It's false. And so I'm no longer a scholastic with that in mind. Did you know, actually, this is something I hadn't thought of until he pointed out to me. So Aquinas, actually, at the end of his life, he claims to have had a vision and has said that all of his works were straw. Um, and a lot of people are going to take that to just mean, oh, well, you compare what he's writing about that's abstract and is based on reading scripture to him actually experiencing these things. and seeing them by a gift of God, and as such, they are effectively incomparable. It's kind of like somebody, if they describe music, you write it down, and then the first thing that you ever hear, the first piece of music you ever hear after writing extensively, reading theory on it, is some beautiful, beautiful piece by Tchaikovsky, like the high point of Romeo and Juliet. It's kind of like that. So some people might make that analogy, but I think that's wrong. I think what Aquinas is saying is that he retracts everything he ever said. And so I think that's a time when we can agree with Aquinas. What some people don't know is that if somebody makes an argument for something, and then later in life they say, well, again, assuming that's the the correct reading of Aquinas, which I have read several pieces of Aquinas, several articles in the Summa Theologiae, so I think I'm an authority on this. Um, when Aquinas disagrees with himself in the future, even if he doesn't give arguments, it automatically invalidates what he said before. So if an author just disagrees with the previous version of themselves, just disregard that previous version. All their arguments are false and unsound, even if they don't give arguments as to why they disagree or they're unsound. And that's something few people know, and that's a general rule that we use in logic, at least presuppositionalist logic, um, which I'm trying to learn more of. But he pointed me, of course, to a great resource over to Dr. James White, a man with impeccable qualities in terms of his doctorate. I'm sure everybody knows about the quality of his education. If you don't, just Google Dr. James White uh, doctorate where he got it, and you'll see that. I mean, he is top-notch scholar in those respects. A really honest man, unambiguously looking to really put out the best construction on things in terms of the nature of academia. But he pointed out a few things. One, he pointed out, well, Aquinas affirms baptismal regeneration, which is a work, of course. And there are people who are not elect that receive baptism, and so they would have to be saved. And when I called in on his show at one point, and I don't think you guys, it's probably not going to come out for a little while, or maybe it's just hidden somewhere, and I haven't found it yet. But I called him on his show, and I asked him, well, okay, well, what do we do then with, say, First Peter 3:21, or Romans 6, or Titus 3, or John 3, and a bunch of other baptismal passages, and then these passages as well about God not desiring that the wicked be condemned, or God desires the salvation of all men, and how that parallels like the Greek words of that. Um, and he pointed something out that it had a really good response, which was just, "Who are you, O man, to question God?" And he pointed out that compared to God, I am a worm, and as such, I don't have a right to question the words of God. And that changed my whole mind. That changed everything for me. Um, Another piece of epistemology is even if Scripture seems to go against it, if it makes God seem more sovereign, then it's true. And that's something I learned. I'm getting to learn more. Um, and as part of that, it took me down a rabbit hole of what Lutheranism is and how we study it. So, what he pointed out, that a lot of Reformed Baptists have correctly pointed out, is that disregard all of Luther's works but Bondage of the Will, and you will see that Luther is actually a Calvinist. Well, you may say, well, we can't disregard all this other works, but what we can say is that it's kind of like invincible ignorance, if we're to use a papist phrase, where Luther, had he met Calvin, had he met, say, Beza and these other figures, his theology would have been Calvinist. He just didn't know them. And so we can say he was a Calvinist, like, potentially he would have been one. And so that's how I'll read him. But the Lutherans are really dumb on this, because what they don't get is that, well, Lutheranism doesn't have any like documents that determine what a Lutheran is. And so it's tricky. I mean, eh, Dr. James White, again, doctor, has a really cool idea that I like, or a good argument, which is when he says, well, what version of Luther is this? Is this Luther from 1517, from before 1517, from say 1535 when he writes Galatians? Like, what kind of Lutheran are you? And he'll point out that Philip Melanchthon, we're more Melanchthonians than anything, even though like later documents actually go against Melanchthon that we're confessionally bound to. Like that, it doesn't matter. because those guys were scholastics, like Chemnitz and Andre. Those guys were scholastics, so we can disregard them. Um, and as such, there's no real consistent basis to determine what a Lutheran is. What I can say is that all of them are wrong. And where does this lead me? So what am I going to do now? Well, my entire reading list, I'm going to throw it away. I'm not going to read any Duns Scotus, Thomas Aquinas, Aristotle, Anselm, Lombard, none of those guys. I'm going to be sticking with church fathers, actually, with patristic sources, like Greg Bahnsen. And as part of that, I'm going to be studying scripture pretty extensively, especially just all the passages um, where God is condemning people and has wrath. Those are the passages I'm going to be looking at exclusively. And then on top of that, I'm going to be really studying the inspired words of Cornelius. Paul. Paul. Studying the inspired words of Paul. And as such, I'm going to become a more biblical Christian, a more biblicist Christian as well. And I'm going to be abandoning all pagan philosophy unless I agree with it. Um, and so, with that in mind, if I were to recommend that you guys do anything, study the works of Van Til, study the works of Bahnsen, and read the Bible through those lenses. Do nothing else. I'm going to be leaving Minnesota. Actually, I'm moving to attend Apologia Church. I'm going to become a professional street preacher and street epistemologist. Um, as Pastor Durbin was, I'm going to be showing up to local targets, and I'm just going to be yelling by what standard for any question that they ask me. That in mind, again, there's going to be no outro to this video because I'm no longer a Lutheran scholastic, and I hope none of you support this channel anymore. I will be starting a new channel, which is going to be Van Til Fan 1689 on here, where I'm going to be pretty much just reading Van Til's works and explaining logic and how all of it is circular. So thank you everybody for watching. Remember that if you liked this video, you were predestined to do it. And if you don't, then you're reprobate and God didn't die for you. So thanks for watching, everyone. Bye.